So, thank you again for coming back. And just a reminder of our 5 topics. So we looked at, on our first session, feasting on scripture, fasting from fear. And then last week we talked about loving the weak, helping the strong. And today, as William already said, we're doing carrying crosses, abandoning burdens. So we're going to look again here at our 4 collects just briefly. We've looked at these each of the 4 weeks. And we'll see that this idea of taking up the cross and following is a common theme in all 4 of these collects, most explicitly in the first one for Holy Cross Day, take up the cross and follow thee. But the idea is present in, I think, all 4 of them. In the second collect there for Holy Week, follow the example of his great humility. Well, that is, if nothing else, it is the humility of the cross. And then the third collect for Easter Even, by continual mortifying of our corrupt affections, we may be buried with him, and that through the grave and gate of death, we may pass to our joyful resurrection. So again, following in the way of the cross. And even in this collect for Easter 2, follow the blessed steps of his most holy life, which is the steps towards the cross. So walking in the steps of Jesus means abandoning burdens and carrying crosses. And I've put up here 2 of Jesus' more famous, more common sayings that we are familiar with and we see and probably know quite well. So the first one is from Matthew, come to me all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls. For my yoke is easy and my burden is light. So abandoning burdens. And then carrying crosses. If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. These two ideas, I think, are sort of 2 sides of the same coin. The idea of abandoning burdens and taking up your cross. 2 sides of the same coin, but they might at first glance almost seem contradictory. On one hand, giving up burdens, and on the other, perhaps taking on some other form of burden, the burden of the cross. But I hope to think about that and reflect on that as we continue on through the evening. So I want to begin at the very beginning. And this might seem like a bit of a diversion, but I promise you we're going somewhere with this. And so this is the very beginning of the Bible. And could I get a volunteer to read this passage for us? Just stick up your hand if you're willing. Janice? So this is an abbreviated version. I've edited it down just to kind of keep it simple.
Okay. In the beginning, God created the heaven and the earth. The earth was without form and void, and darkness was over the face of the deep, and the Spirit of God was hovering over the face of the waters. And God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And there was evening, and there was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate the waters from the waters." And God called the expanse heaven. And there was evening, and there was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered together into one place, and let the dry land appear." And God said, "Let the earth sprout vegetation, plants yielding seed, and fruit trees bearing fruit, in which is their seed, each according to its kind on the earth." And there was evening, and there was morning, the third day. And God said, "Let there be light in the expanse of the heavens to separate the day from the night." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fourth day. And God said, "Let the waters swarm with swarms of living creatures, and let birds fly above the earth across the expanse of the heavens." And there was evening, and there was morning, the fifth day. And God said, "Let the earth bring forth living creatures according to their kinds, livestock and creeping things, and beasts of the earth according to their kinds." Then God said, "Let us make man in our image, after our likeness. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him. Male and female, he created them. And God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening and there was morning, the sixth day.
Okay, thank you. So just a couple things I want to point out about that very well-known passage, which have intrigued people over the just centuries. Couple things. So one is that we see in the very first, second, third sentence, the Spirit of God is mentioned right in the third sentence of the Bible, who we think of as the Holy Spirit as Christians. And we see that also that God speaks everything into being. So it is God's word that brings things into being. God says, let there be light, and then there is light. So it's God's speaking that brings things into being. And we also see that God talks, it speaks in a way that this has been quite intriguing to people, especially to Christians, that God speaks in the plural. So God says, let us make man in our image, after our likeness. And there's been a number of ways that people have tried to understand that and explain it. Of course, Christians tend to see in that some sort of hinting towards the Trinity. And we've already had this reference to the Spirit of God up at the very beginning. And so we get this hint that there is more to God than perhaps meets the eye, if I can say it that way. So those are the three things I wanted to point out. So we see this sort of Trinitarian nudging that is coming forward here, at least from our perspective as Christians, and that God speaks everything into being. Okay, just a quick reminder that there is in the Old Testament tradition, there is this idea of wisdom. And this can mean a couple of different things, but wisdom, the wisdom books in some ways are books of practical wisdom. But there is also a sense in which wisdom is of divine origin. And so we come across wisdom literature in the Old Testament in the books of Job, the Psalms, Proverbs, Ecclesiastes, and Song of Songs, sometimes also known as Song of Solomon. And we also find wisdom literature in the Apocrypha, in particular in Sirach or Ecclesiasticus, and a book called The Wisdom of Solomon. And so these books fall into this genre of biblical literature called wisdom literature. And we come across different things in these books. We come across very practical wisdom about how to live in the world. And we also encounter wisdom taking on a very elevated stature. And we're going to see that shortly. I'll show you what I mean. So wisdom in the tradition, both in this part of the Bible in Proverbs, but also in the broader tradition, at a certain time began to be personified as, if not perhaps only metaphorically, but others have argued even more so than just a metaphor, that divine wisdom is almost as if wisdom was a person. And Proverbs actually uses that device to describe wisdom in chapter 8. So I wonder if somebody might read this to us from chapter 8 of Proverbs. Can I get a volunteer for that?
Shall I read it?
Hene raised her hand. Go ahead, Hene.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay. Divine wisdom is personified in Proverbs. Proverbs chapter 8, verse 1 and 22 to 36. Does not wisdom call? On the heights beside the way, at the crossroads, she takes her stand. Beside the gates in front of the town, at the entrance of the portals, she cries aloud. To you, O men, I call, and my cry is to the children of man. The Lord possessed me at the beginning of his work, the first of his acts of old. Ages ago I was set up, at the first, before the beginning of the earth. When there were no depths, I was brought forth, when there were no springs abounding with water. Before the mountains had been shaped, before the hills I was brought forth, before he had made the earth with its fields, or the first of the dust of the world. When he established the heavens, I was there. When he drew a circle on the face of the deep, when he made firm the skies above, when he established the fountains of the deep, when he assigned to the sea its limit, so that the waters might not transgress his command, when he marked out the foundations of the earth, then I was beside him like a master workman, and I was daily his delight, rejoicing before him always, rejoicing in his inhabited world, and delighting in the children of man. And now, O sons, listen to me. Blessed are those who keep my ways. Hear instruction and be wise, and do not neglect it. Blessed is the one who listens to me, watching daily at my gates, waiting beside my doors. For whoever finds me finds life and obtains favor from the Lord.
Thank you. So here in Proverbs, divine wisdom is personified, in this case, in a feminine way, Lady Wisdom. And wisdom has personality. And not only that, but wisdom describes herself as having been around since the very beginning, since before creation, before the mountains had been shaped, I was brought forth. And so wisdom goes right back to the very beginning. And if we think of that story from Genesis we read, we might want to just hold that in our minds. So moving forward now to the New Testament, some of the New Testament writers describe Christ, the Son of God, in ways that I think not coincidentally resemble divine wisdom. So think back to Genesis and then think back to the reading from Proverbs that we just heard. So wisdom is this divine character who is there at the very beginning and who has an important role to play in creation. Wisdom is there and is an agent of creation. And so the New Testament writers seem to pick up on this idea, and they seem to be painting Christ, the eternal Son of God, in this way, and perhaps even suggesting that there is a correlation between Christ and divine wisdom. So let's see what I'm talking about here. Monica, you had offered. I wonder if you could read for us John 1.
Yes. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was in the beginning with God. All things were made through him, and without him was not anything made that was made. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, full of grace and truth. We have beheld his glory, glory as of the only Son from the Father.
Thank you. Annis, could you read the next one for us, please? Colossians, please. Annis.
He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or dominions or rulers or authorities, all things were created through him and for him. And he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from the dead, that in everything he might be preeminent. For in him all the fullness of God was pleased to dwell, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether on earth or in heaven, making peace by the blood of his cross.
Thank you. And William, I wonder if you could read the Hebrews lesson for us, please.
Long ago, at many times and in many ways, God spoke to our fathers by the prophets, but in these last days he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed the heir of all things, through whom also he created the world. He is the radiance of the glory of God and the exact imprint of his nature, and he upholds the universe by the word of his power. Of the Son he said, "You, Lord, laid the foundation of the earth in the beginning, and the heavens and the work of your hands. They will perish, but you remain. They will all wear out like a garment. Like a robe, you will roll them up. Like a garment, they will be changed. But you are the same, and your years will have no end."
Thank you. So all three of these, I think, point us in a certain direction, which I've already alluded to, which is that, well, first of all, that these New Testament writers see Christ as being there at the very beginning of creation, pre-existent, and that creation, not just there, but actually active in creation, that an agent of creation of the universe and of all things. And they seem to be echoing, I think, both Genesis and that section from Proverbs, which ties Christ, arguably, you could argue that ties Christ to this personified wisdom, and that wisdom and Christ somehow are related, if not the same thing. So let's keep that all in our minds, and I promise you that will relate to the topic for tonight. Any questions about that before we move on? I realize it's maybe a lot to take in, or thoughts or comments. Okay. So, like wisdom, who calls people to follow her and to learn from her, Jesus also calls us to follow, and we see this all throughout the Gospels, that Jesus is constantly calling people to follow him. Lots of different examples there that I could find, and there might be others as well. So this expression, "follow me," comes up many times, and Jesus often will, quite suddenly, people will drop everything and begin to follow Jesus, seeking something in Christ that they perhaps don't even know what it is that they're seeking, and yet they're compelled to follow him. This happens time and time again. Okay, so getting now to more specifically to our topic today, which is casting off burdens, or abandoning burdens, and carrying crosses. So we see in the New Testament that Jesus, as we all know, Jesus was in conflict often with the religious establishment of his day. So the Pharisees and the Sadducees and the scribes, or the lawyers. Jesus is often in conflict with them, and he had, it seems, in some ways, a low estimation of them, or at least he thought that they were leading people astray, or at least not leading them to the kingdom. And I've taken out two examples here where Jesus specifically accuses them of loading up burdens on people. And of course, I think, as we all know, that the law, the Torah, was expounded upon and interpreted, and it did get to the point where there was a lot of rules that people had to follow, and those who were professional religious people could spend their lives studying those rules and living their lives by those rules, and probably for them it was something that was joyful. But we can imagine that for more ordinary people that was very difficult to follow all of those rules. And it, although no doubt started off as a positive way of trying to interpret the law for people and to help people understand how to apply the law to their lives, it appears become burdensome. and people, or at least Jesus anyway, saw it as very burdensome for people. And so he railed against this. And here's two examples. I wonder if I can call on somebody else to read the first one for us. John Bean, would you read for us? That'd be wonderful if you would. Just have to unmute yourself first. You're good. You're all good.
Then Jesus said to the crowds and to his disciples, "The scribes and the Pharisees sit on Moses' seat. So do and observe whatever they tell you, but not the works they do, for they preach but do not practice. They tie up heavy burdens, hard to bear, and lay them on people's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to move them with their finger. They do all their deeds to be sent by others. For they make their phylacteries broad and their fringes long, and they love the place of honor at feasts and the best seats in the synagogues and greetings in the marketplaces and being called rabbi by others. But woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. For you neither enter yourselves nor allow those who would enter to go in."
Thank you. Yeah, so here he's quite harsh with the scribes and the Pharisees and accusing them of laying on so many rules and burdens that in fact, they're having the opposite effect. They're making it impossible for people to enter the kingdom of heaven, for you've shut the kingdom of heaven in people's faces. And you won't even enter it yourself, he says, because you're so preoccupied with all of these rules, these burdens. Okay, somebody else read the second lesson. Patricia, could I ask you to do that? Oh, Sybil also raised her hand, but...
Okay, thank you. Luke chapter 11, 37 to 41, 45 to 52. While Jesus was speaking, the Pharisees asked him to dine with him. So he went in and reclined at table. The Pharisee was astonished to see that he did not first wash before dinner. And the Lord said to him, "Now you Pharisees cleanse the outside of the cup and of the dish, but inside you are full of greed and wickedness. You fools, did not he who made the outside make the inside also? But give as alms those things that are within, and behold, everything is clean for you." One of the lawyers answered him, "Teacher, in saying these things you insult us also." And he said, "Woe to you lawyers also, for you load people with burdens hard to bear, and you yourselves do not touch the burdens with one of your fingers. Woe to you, for you build the tombs of the prophets whom your fathers killed. So you are witnesses, and you consent to the deeds of your fathers, for they killed them, and you build their tombs. Therefore also the wisdom of God said, I will send them prophets and apostles, some of whom they will kill and persecute, so that the blood of all the prophets shed from the foundation of the world may be charged against this generation, from the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, who perished between the altar and the sanctuary. Yes, I tell you, it will be required of this generation. Woe to you, lawyers, for you have taken away the key of knowledge. You did not enter yourselves and your kindred, those who were entering. You did not enter yourselves, and you hindered those who were entering.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so similar thing here. Tina and Sybil, you both raised your hand. I'm just wondering, were you raising your hand offering to read, or do you have questions? Sybil?
I'll be a reader at some point.
I'm sorry?
Offering to read.
Oh, wonderful. Both of you are offering to read. Okay, I will definitely call on you in short order. So, first of all, does anybody know what the phylacteries are and the fringes? Does anybody want to tell us what that's about?
I think the phylacteries were the boxes that they put on their foreheads with scripture inside.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. And then the fringes are just the kind of bluish fringes on the garment. So they're showing off. They're showing how pious they are. And in the Luke reading, of course, as we know, there was lots of rules about ritual washing and ritual purity. And if you didn't follow those rules to a T, you were putting your own cleanliness at stake, your own sort of ritual cleanliness at stake. And so it was quite a complex, one can imagine, quite a complex way to live your life with so many different rules, with such high stakes if you don't follow them.
That strikes me that Jesus, in his short life on earth, must have experienced a lot of things to be able to speak with such clarity to the crowds. He seems to know all about lawyers, and you'd wonder what experience he's had with them to be able to chastise them the way that he does, and nobody questions that. Just an observation.
Yeah, well, definitely. And to be clear, so the lawyers are, the lawyers, but they're the people that are sort of expounding on the law and interpreting the law, the religious law, and how to live by the rules that have sort of built up over the centuries based on the Torah. Yeah, absolutely. Spoke with great clarity, and as we can imagine, earned himself lots of enemies by doing so, as is usually the case. Yeah. Okay, I'm just going to move my cat here so I can see my notes. Just sitting on my notes, as I want to do. So these are specifically the burdens that I think Jesus was preoccupied with, at least on the surface. These are not burdens that I think any of us face, but I wonder when we think of this idea of abandoning burdens and Jesus' invitation to give up burdens, and here again he's talking about these specific religious burdens, but do we have suggestions or ideas of what that might mean for us today? Does anybody? There's no right answer to this, but I'd love to hear any thoughts you have on this. What might be burdens that one in this day and age might choose to let go of, or at least try to let go of? Not necessarily you in particular, but just even if you want to speak generally, I'd love to hear some ideas.
The burden of worry, just worrying as a burden.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I think that's definitely a symptom of our age, I would suspect. Maybe it always has been. I don't know. Any other thoughts about burdens that one might want to cast off and abandon?
Oh, I mean, what jumps to me is financial burdens, which I can't seem to just decide to not have financial burdens. But some people do want to make their financial burdens less, and so we'll kind of maybe downsize or not have as many material things that to worry about, I guess.
Right. Yeah. Or and also just being giving up being preoccupied with financial gain, I guess. Okay. Any other thoughts?
I think the burden of guilt.
Guilt, yeah. Definitely. Yeah, and so I think we can hear these words of Jesus, and we can hear them in the ways that are the most relevant to us in our daily life. So again, he says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, I will give you rest. take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light. This particular saying of Jesus, which is well known to all of us, can be shown to be based on, or at least drawn from, wisdom literature. And so you remember at the beginning, we talked about the books, the wisdom books, and there was 5 books in the Old Testament and then 2 from the Apocrypha. And so one of those is the book called Sirach. And here in Sirach, the author is talking about his own experience of wisdom and what he has learned, and he invites the reader to come and learn from him what he has learned. But the language is strikingly reminiscent of what Jesus says. And so I've highlighted the parts that I think are very, very similar to each other. And so the author of Sirach says, "Draw near to me, you who are untaught, and lodge in my school." And Jesus says, "Come to me, all who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest." And then Sirach, "Put your neck under the yoke and let your souls receive instruction." And Jesus says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me." Sirach, "I have labored little." Jesus, "My yoke is easy and my burden is light." And then Sirach, "And found myself much rest." And Jesus, "You will find rest for your souls." Henny, you've raised a hand?
Yeah, I actually have a question about the Apocrypha. I don't know if this is like going on a sideline here, but
No.
I don't know if you maybe want to finish first and then get to the question.
Sure. Yeah. Well, so I mean that was basically it. I just wanted to show that Jesus is drawing on Sirach, on this wisdom literature. So Sirach is talking about wisdom, the wisdom of God, and what he's learned, and he's inviting people to come and learn from him. And Jesus, I think, draws quite heavily on this language to talk about himself. So he's saying, come to me and you will find what you're looking for. Take my yoke upon you and you will learn. And come to me and you will find rest. And so I think this, I believe, perhaps relates to this conversation we were having earlier about divine wisdom and Christ. So Henny, go ahead. You had a question about the Apocrypha. I don't know if I can answer it, but I can try.
Yeah, I'm just wondering, why do some denominations not consider Apocrypha to be like canonized?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that it was, I believe I'm not going to give you a great answer on this because I'd have to read up on this and remind myself exactly how this unfolded. But the Roman Catholic Church uses the book, what we call the Apocrypha is part of the Roman Catholic Bible. So Roman Catholics actually have a different Bible than we do. And it's not a separate section. The books are folded into the Old Testament. And there's a whole section of Daniel, for example, that we don't find in Protestant Bibles. So at the Protestant Reformation, they opted not to keep those books as part of the canon. And I can't quite remember all the details of how that decision was made, but there certainly is a difference between the Catholic tradition and the Protestant tradition. So you can find Bibles today that are purely the Old Testament, New Testament. You can find Bibles that have a third section called the Apocrypha, and then you can also find Catholic Bibles that have it all kind of mixed together.
Okay, thank you.
But why does apocryphal mean as an adjective? I assume it's derived from the Apocrypha, but it means like doubtful, or like it might not be true.
What is I'd have to look up what's the definition of apocryphal or apocryphal.
Apocryphal says it's of doubtful authenticity, although widely circulated as being true.
Yeah. Right. Well, so if you look at the 39, it's not that they're doubtful. It's just that the 39 articles actually talk about this, and they're not considered canon, so they're not considered sort of on the same level as the Old Testament and New Testament books, but they can be read. The 39 articles say for edification, and so we actually do get readings from the Apocrypha in the daily office throughout the year. They come up. but they just don't have you're not to draw doctrine from them. So if you're seeking to establish doctrine, you can't, at least in our tradition, you can't appeal to the Apocrypha, or at least it doesn't have the same standing as the Old Testament. But it's not that they're fake or that they're somehow illegitimate. They just don't have that same quality to them.
Maybe it's just a coincidence that there's a lowercase a as an adjective. It's not uppercase. So.
Oh, well, I think it's related. But.
Yeah, I mean, it'd be interesting to learn about that decision-making process and kind of how that came about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Okay. So I think we see in the New Testament that wisdom, divine wisdom, is what I'm calling cross-shaped. So wisdom is cross-shaped. And Paul talks about this, I think, eloquently. And maybe I'll call on Sybil now to read this from 1 Corinthians.
Okay. The word of the cross is folly to those who are perishing, but to us who are being saved, it is the power of God. Where is the wise man? Where is the scribe? Where is the debater of this age? Has not God made foolish the wisdom of the world? For since in the wisdom of God, the world did not know God through wisdom, it pleased God through the folly of what we preached to save those who believe. For Jews demand signs and Greeks seek wisdom, but we preach Christ crucified, a stumbling block to Jews and folly to Gentiles. But to those who are called, both Jews and Greeks, Christ the power of God and the wisdom of God. For the foolishness of God is wiser than men, and the weakness of God is stronger than men. For consider your calling, brothers. Not many of you were wise according to worldly standards. Not many of you were powerful. Not many were of noble birth. But God chose what is foolish in the world to shame the wise. God chose what is weak in the world to shame the strong. God chose what is low and despised in the world, even things that are not, to bring to nothing things that are, so that no human being might boast in the presence of God. And because of him, you are in Christ Jesus, who became to us wisdom from God, righteousness and sanctification and redemption, so that, as it is written, let the one who boasts boast in the Lord.
Thanks, Sybil. So Paul does seem to be linking Christ to wisdom, and he actually does call him the power of God and the wisdom of God. And this passage would suggest that the wisdom of the world is not the wisdom of God, that the wisdom of God is something else. And Paul talks about Christ crucified, the cross, Christ being the wisdom of God. So the wisdom of God is cross-shaped. And he uses this as an example. He says that God chose not what was wise and what was considered, what was well liked by the world, but he called those who were not powerful, the weak and the shameful, and those who were despised. He chose them to be the bearers of salvation, the message of salvation to the world. So God chooses what is weak, not what is strong. And we've talked about that before. The wisdom of God is found in the shape of the cross. And this theme, I think, continues throughout the Gospels. Jesus, as we've already alluded to, Jesus uses this expression, to deny yourself, take up your cross and follow me. He uses this on several occasions. This seems to be the path that we are called to follow Christ, divine wisdom, and that path looks like the cross. So I wonder if, Tina, could you read this first passage for us from Matthew?
Sure. From that time, Jesus began to show his disciples that he must go to Jerusalem and suffer many things from the elders and chief priests and scribes and be killed, and on the third day be raised. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him, saying, "Far be it from you, Lord. This shall never happen to you." But he turned and said to Peter, "Get behind me, Satan. You are a hindrance to me, for you are not setting your mind on the things of God, but on the things of man." Then Jesus told his disciples, "If anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it."
Okay, and then the second one there from Matthew. I wonder if Janice, could you read that for us?
Yep. Do not think that I have come to bring peace to the earth. I have not come to bring peace, but a sword. For I have come to set a man against his father, and a daughter against her mother, and a daughter-in-law against her mother-in-law, and a person's enemies will be those of his own household. Whoever loves father or mother more than me is not worthy of me, and whoever loves son or daughter more than me is not worthy of me. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And whoever does not take his cross and follow me is not worthy of me. Whoever finds his life will lose it, and whoever loses his life for my sake will find it.
Thank you. Sorry, that last two sentences got repeated there. Sorry about that.
Oh,
Yeah, that's I don't know how that happened. And John, can I ask you to read the third one there from Luke? Just remind you to unmute yourself.
Oh, no, that was muted.
There, you're good now. You're good to go.
Now great crowds accompanied him, and he turned and said to them, "If anyone comes to me and does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, and even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. Whoever does not bear his own cross and come after me cannot be my disciple. So therefore, any one of you who does not renounce all that he has cannot be my disciple."
Okay, so I wonder what your thoughts are on these three passages in general. They might come across as a little, it's a pretty high bar, especially when he says things like, "I've come to set a man against his father and a daughter against her mother," and so on. It sounds all very kind of difficult. What's your thoughts? What do you think Jesus is trying to say here? What is there kind of a theme that runs through this, or is there a massive major point that he's trying to make with all of this?
I think he's using hyperbole. He means he needs to be first before all the family members and everyone else. He needs to be first.
Yeah, I think that's right. So I don't know that he actually wants us to hate other people. I don't think he does. I think you're right, Monica, that it's hyperbole. Hannah, you raised your hand.
Yeah, I think, well, the path of the cross is path of suffering, and then ultimately, obviously, being resurrected. God resurrected Jesus by his power, but that walking that path is suffering. And so a lot of the time people say, we want to be made in the image of Christ, and the popular, I don't really know how to describe it, but it's almost like the popular thinking about it is that it's going to make you all nice and have gooey feelings and everything like that. But then when the reality comes, it's actually the cross, and it's a road of suffering. So sometimes I don't know if we know what we know what we're asking when we are asking to be made like Jesus.
Right. Yeah. It's that's true. I think you see, not that I watch a lot of this stuff, but just sort of my surface level knowledge of a lot of kind of American TV evangelists. There's a form of kind of Christianity that is all about feeling good, and I'm obviously generalizing here, but you hear this in a lot of preaching and a lot of Christian writing, that it's about feeling good, feeling positive, believing in yourself, that kind of thing, which is all good. but it misses what I think is a central plank of Christianity. And this is clear to me in the life and witness of Jesus and in his teachings, that the road of the Christian is not just about feeling good about yourself. And I think this is what you're saying, Hene. It's also about walking the way of the cross. I think that is actually the true calling of Christians. And this means lots of things in different ways and to different people, but I think it's important. Okay, so we're just going to flip through these next two ones here. So obviously, we all know that Jesus literally carried his cross. I'll just read this one. So they took Jesus and he went out bearing his own cross to the place called the place of a skull, which in Aramaic is called Golgotha. There they crucified him, and with him two others, one on either side, and Jesus between them. Pilate also wrote an inscription and put it on the cross, and it read, "Jesus of Nazareth, the King of the Jews." Many of the Jews read this inscription, for the place where Jesus was crucified was near the city, and it was written in Aramaic, in Latin, and in Greek. So the chief priests of the Jews said to Pilate, "Do not write the King of the Jews, but rather, this man said, 'I am the King of the Jews.'" Pilate answered, "What I have written, I have written." So Jesus, of course, carried his own cross. But who's the next person who carried the cross, literally? Anybody know?
Some
Simon.
bystander on the way.
Yeah,
Forget his
exactly.
name.
Simon of Cyrene.
Simon of Cyrene.
Yeah, that's right. So Simon, love to know. I wish we knew more about him. So Simon was compelled by the soldiers to carry Christ's cross for him. So Simon is the first person after Christ to literally carry a cross, and not just literally, but also to model, at least in that moment, to walk in the path of Jesus and to begin this Christian life of bearing crosses. I would also say in a way that Mary was one of the first people to bear a cross, and not quite literally, but you might remember that back at the beginning of Jesus' life, when she brought Jesus to be presented at the temple, that Simeon, when he pronounced the Nunc Dimittis, which we said at evening prayer tonight, he went on to say, towards the end of this first paragraph here, if you can see where my cursor is there, actually here. So Simeon blessed them, and he said to Mary, "Behold, this child is appointed for the fall and rising of many in Israel, and for a sign that is opposed, and a sword will pierce through your own soul also," he said to Mary, indicating that Mary would also be suffering for her son. And indeed, at the end of Jesus' life in John, we see that Mary, the mother of Jesus, was one of those who stood at the cross of Jesus. And we can only imagine her suffering as she bore that cross with Christ. And Jesus, of course, hands his mother over to the beloved disciple and says to Mary, "Woman, behold your son," and to the son, and to John, "John, behold your mother." So Mary, I think, is one of the first people to, along with Simon, to bear the cross. And Peter, the apostle, is also one who bore the cross. Peter, actually, the tradition of the church says, was actually crucified himself. And even before his death in the New Testament, Jesus hints at the kind of death that Peter will experience. So he says to Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And he said, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." And he said to him, "Feed my lambs." And the second time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you. Tend my sheep." And then he said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" And Peter was grieved because he had said to him the third time, "Do you love me?" And he said, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Truly, I say to you, when you were young, you used to dress yourself and walk wherever you wanted. But when you are old, you will stretch out your hands, and another will dress you and carry you where you do not want to go. And he said this to show by what kind of death he was to glorify God. And after saying this, he said to him, "Follow me." So Peter is invited to follow the way of the cross. And indeed, Peter will. He will literally be crucified. There is a book called The Acts of Peter, which is not considered scripture, but it's from the early church. And it tells the story of Peter, and he is convinced to actually flee from Rome to save his own life. But on his way outside of the city, he encounters Christ, or at least some kind of vision of Christ. And when he saw him, he said, "Lord, whither goest thou?" Which is led to a famous Latin saying, "Quo vadis," which is the name of some movies and so on. "Where are you going?" And the Lord said to him, "I go into Rome to be crucified." And Peter said, "Lord, are you being crucified again?" And he said, "Yea, Peter, I am being crucified again." And then Peter came to himself, and having beheld the Lord ascending up into heaven, he returned to Rome, rejoicing and glorifying God. And he said, "I am being crucified," the which was about to befall Peter. And in several places from early church writings, we hear that Peter was indeed crucified upside down. He was crucified upside down, Jerome says, because he didn't deem himself worthy to be crucified in the same way that Jesus Christ was crucified. So he was crucified in the time of Nero. So we see people who literally bore the cross. We see Mary, who I guess who shared in the sufferings of cross. Peter, who actually was crucified. I'd be curious to know what ways we might be called to bear the cross, apart from actual martyrdom of some sort, but in more regular daily life. I wonder what ways we might be called to bear our crosses. Anybody have some thoughts about that? Or maybe put another way, what's the difference between bearing a cross and carrying a burden? What's the difference between having heavy burdens loaded down with heavy burdens on our shoulders versus carrying crosses?
You're carrying, you're moving. I mean, sounds more like you're going forward. You're not you're not in stasis.
Yeah, that's good. I like that. Yeah, Henny?
I'm still learning about this, but it's there's this interesting paradox actually, like where it seems like if you give up your burdens, like say your worries and things like that, and you give it to Jesus, then you kind of like he does the saving work. So he does the redemptive work, and like he says, his yoke is easy. And so it's kind of like just receiving that from him. But at the same time, when you're walking this path of suffering, you kind of start to identify with him more, and you sort of start to feel the love that he has for you more. It's kind of hard to describe. It's very abstract, but you can kind of really start to really feel that in your bones. Kind of, yeah, that's what I would say.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Anybody else have ideas about that? Yeah, Ennis.
I think when you're carrying your burdens, there's a sense that you are alone in doing this. When you're carrying the cross, you are with Jesus. You're walking with Jesus. So you're not alone.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. I wonder too. Oh, go ahead, Janice. Yeah.
Well, I was Anna said something to me a long time ago, many years ago, that I was always
Words of wisdom.
that, yeah, 100%. that we were on the selection committee together when we hired you, Rob. And one of the people in the committee, we were just, we talk about what church means to us, right? When we're trying to sort of build this profile of the parish. And one person said that church is a place where she could come to forget her troubles. And that's not wrong. That was what she felt. But Anna said that church is a place to bring troubles. And it's stuck with me all these years, because I think it's exactly like what you were saying, Hannah, the idea that you sort of bring your worries and your burdens to Jesus, and or to church, I guess. Same thing. So thank you, Annis. Helping me.
You're welcome.
One of many ways that you've changed my life.
I would just, that's great. Thank you. And, maybe this is what's already been said, but I just throw in my own 2 cents about, in addition to all those wonderful things that you've all said, sort of your one's perspective. Like, so if this particular issue that I'm dealing with, whatever it might be, if I'm on my own on it and it's just weighing me down and I'm not moving forward, and I'm seeing it as a burden that's affecting me and ruining my happiness. That's one way of viewing it. But the other way to view whatever this issue might be is as something that is redemptive. In other words, a cross. So the issue is the same one. It hasn't changed, but my perspective on it is different, because in the way in which this problem that I'm dealing with is the way that I encounter it and the way I act within it and the way it affects me, I'm going to see that as part of my sanctification, my redemption. This is not a wasted time. This illness that I have is not just a waste and a diversion. It's actually an experience that will help me grow in my faith and trust. And or this problem with my relative who's just driving me bonkers is not just a problem that's making my life miserable. It's actually an opportunity to grow and to perhaps even help that other person grow. So the problem's the same, but the way we approach it is different. If we see it as a burden or whether we see it as a cross, if that makes any sense.
What did you get to eat?
Pardon me?
What did you get to eat?
Taco.
Oh, is that meant for us, or is that?
No, I don't think so.
Okay, all right. Great. So I'm just going to close now with this. We'll make us sing it, but it's one of my favorite hymns. I'm sure maybe some of yours as well, which I think speaks to the topic for today. Take up thy cross, the Savior said. If thou would my disciple be, deny thyself, the world forsake, and humbly follow after me. Take up thy cross, let not its weight fill thy weak soul with vain alarm. His strength shall bear thy spirit up, and brace thy heart and nerve thine arm. Take up thy cross, nor heed the shame, and let thy foolish pride be still. Thy Lord for thee endured to die upon a cross on Calvary's hill. Take up thy cross then in his strength, and calmly every danger brave. 'Twill guide you to a better home and lead to victory over the grave. Take up thy cross and follow Christ, nor think till death to lay it down, for only those who bear the cross may hope to wear the glorious crown. Okay, that's it for me. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. Really appreciate it.